Hello, everyone. I welcome you to this time of reflecting together on the fundamentals of the spiritual way that Jesus Christ has provided, offered to humanity at large. For our thinking, searching, and finding, let's consider the 9th verse of the 2nd chapter of the first letter of Peter. Peter's first letter or epistle, chapter 2, verse 9, where you and I are defined in a very interesting way. Peter says that we should know and we should be clear about this, that first, we are a chosen people. Number 2, we are a royal priesthood. Two things. Peter urges us to remember two things about ourselves. This is interesting. Who are we? First of all, we are a chosen people. Secondly, we are a royal priesthood. Now, the first idea, we are a chosen people. The most basic meaning and implication of this statement or this revelation is that we have to be different from the rest of the world. Chosen to be different. It's absurd to choose somebody from a particular state to be in the same state. Then why choose that person? Just let him be where he is. So to choose or to be chosen is to be called into a state or a quality of life or a culture radically different from what prevailed in the life of that person before that person was called or chosen in that manner. Now, therefore, we need to have clarity as to what this change, this radical shift involves. Now, in order to understand this, it's necessary to consider the overall spiritual vision of the Lord Jesus Christ. For after all, Peter's insight that we are a chosen people and chosen to constitute a royal priesthood is born out of his very deep and clear understanding of the essence of Jesus' public ministry and his spiritual vision. Now, it's very clear, though Christians tend to overlook this, it is very clear that Jesus did not accept the kind of stratifications or divisions that existed in the domain of religion. Jesus' understanding of the religious life of the people of his times, the Jews, Judaism, was, and that is applicable to all religions in every age and every place of the world, and therefore it's of universal application. Jesus' understanding was that the emergence of a religious elite was the foremost spiritual misfortune that happened to the Jews. The Jewish society as a whole suffered from the domination of a religious elite with a high priest at the apex, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the scribes, etc., the Levites, all graded below him, aided, of course, by something like a religious parliament called the Sanhedrin. So it's a very clear worldly structure. And this structure, which was hierarchical in nature, with one man at the top and everybody ranged below him in order of importance, was an exact replica of the worldly order. And Jesus had the common sense to realize that you cannot have a spiritual system which functions entirely according to the fallen pattern or model of the world. This is a clarity that the Christendom lacks even this day. So it is only natural that Jesus did not allow the stratified religious structure imposed on the people by the religious elite to interfere with and corrupt or confuse his spiritual mission. Consequently, you don't find a priest participating in any of the activities of Jesus. They try to intrude into his mission in order to confuse him and to frustrate him. And therefore you see many encounters between Jesus and Pharisees recorded in the four Gospels. But Jesus never invited and involved them in his mission. They were intruders. But even those intrusions serve to generate certain spiritual principles, but that's subject for another day. So Jesus was very clear that so long as the religious life of the people is organized entirely according to the worldly model of organization, the spiritual welfare of the people was bound to suffer, because the net effect of creating a religious elite called the priestly class is the religious subjection of the vast majority of the people called the laity. So now everything is under the supreme and sovereign control of the priestly class. The lay people are good for nothing. They have no understanding. They have no godly interests, tastes, or insights. They have to be led by the nose by a priestly class who alone monopolize all the spiritual resources, insights, skills, etc. And therefore the lay people have to depend entirely on them and to abide by their dictates from time to time. So this is nothing but religious slavery. The fact that this happens presumably under the sanction of God doesn't make it any less deleterious or harmful to the spiritual welfare of the people. Jesus was particularly perspicacious or clear, very, very clear about this. And who understood this clearly? Peter. And many people don't realize that Peter was a man of very deep and clear understanding, though no one gives him any credit for it. That's because our imagination is always dominated by Paul. Paul is a great scholar and the representative of the high culture of the times, a flamboyant character, and he looms large in the horizon of the early church. But I'm convinced that Jesus was not misguided in recognizing the spiritual merit of Peter. Now, if we have understood this much, we can now understand how this structure is purely worldly in nature. Now, let me explain that part as clearly as I can so that our understanding is clear. There's a lot of confusion in this domain. That's the reason why I feel I need to provide additional insights into the similarity between this religious structure and the structure of the world. If you look into the emergence of political elite in the world, now if you look at the power structure of the world, you find that there's a small handful of people who constitute the religious elite, the political elite. The vast majority of people are commoners, and the spiritual elite take all decisions and they impose it on the people. And as Count Leo Tolstoy wrote very convincingly and powerfully, he says, rest assured that whenever the political elite takes a decision or formulates a law, it will only be with an eye to promoting their interests, though they will always say that it's being done for the sake of the common people. And the trick that the political elite plays is that they succeed, or they are perfect at the art of persuading the common people to believe that the interest of the elite is really the interest of the common people. So the same thing happens in religion. So now let's understand this, the dynamic of the emergence of the political elite. Now it all begins like this. Initially the people are together and they realize from a practical point of view that not everyone can participate in the process of governing people. For example, India is a land of 140 crores, that is 1.4 billion people. It's absolutely impossible that every Indian participates in the art of governance. The result will be utter chaos. And therefore, the responsibility of looking after the welfare of the people must be entrusted to a chosen few. And in the early stages of healthy functioning, this chosen few who are entrusted with the task of ensuring and enlarging the welfare of the common people, and the people themselves work together. They work together like this. But gradually, the people begin to be indifferent and non-participant in the process, and this small group of people to whom this responsibility is entrusted as only a practical arrangement, they begin to form themselves into a group, and a political elite is born out of it, and they begin to develop delusions of superiority. They are superior and the people are inferior. The people know nothing, and only the political elites know what is good for the country, and they thereafter monopolize all instruments of governance as well as formation of public opinion, education, etc. As a result, over a period of time, this idea is continuously dinned into the minds of the people that they are incapable of looking after themselves, and the best they can do for themselves is to depend abjectly on the political elite, who will then decide what is to be done and what is not to be done. Now, this particular hierarchical model results in the disempowerment of the people. It paralyzes them. It is harmful to their growth and their empowerment, and it cripples them, and it makes a caricature of them. But unfortunately, the people begin to be so deeply rooted in this arrangement of political slavery that they sincerely begin to believe that there is no alternative to this structure, this hierarchical structure. Now, Jesus realized that this hierarchical structure, if allowed to continue in the domain of religion, will perpetuate the misery and the paralysis of the people. For example, towards the end of the 9th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, you find Jesus clearly reading the plight of the people in relation to the religiosity that was practiced at that time. He says the people are like sheep without a shepherd. The people are like sheep without a shepherd. Now that is the most appropriate description of the disempowerment and the disarray in which people live. The same is true today. And the logic is very simple. As long as we accept and perpetuate this hierarchical structure of organizing our religious life, our religious community life, including life of the church, only the interest of the religious elite will be foregrounded and persuaded, and the plight of the people will be neglected, and the religious elite will come to exist as an end in itself. They'll have a life of their own and interests of their own, and the common people will be made to serve their interests. So a complete turnabout, a roundabout comes, what's called volte-face. A somersault happens. The system was initially designed to ensure and enlarge the interest, the spiritual welfare of the laity. But over a period of time, the laity became spiritually inactive. They began to depend on this religious elite which they themselves created. And the religious elite began to develop their own delusions of religious superiority and their proximity or closeness to God, whereas ordinary people are far away from God. And there was no limit to their sense of power and their willingness to control and manipulate the people, presumably in the name of God. And all this arrangement was utterly harmful to the religious growth, the spiritual growth and empowerment of the people. So, therefore, Jesus endeavored to create an alternative system, a counter model. And if you really study the institution of the Last Supper, you'll realize that that is really the culminating point of this. That is the insignia, that's a hallmark of this new spiritual order that Jesus came to establish, where the sense of hierarchy has no place whatsoever. But the greatest subversion that has happened in the history of Christianity is, at this very ritual, which was meant to shut the door against the dominance of the religious elite, the hierarchy, has been misappropriated by the religious hierarchy and turned into their exclusive privilege. So much so, the laity cannot touch it, only the priestly class can handle it. And they only have the right to celebrate the Lord's Supper. And the tragedy is that it was meant precisely to avert this aberration. So, taking all this into account, Peter gives us this very, very important, radically different teaching, different to what the world understood, different to what the religious structures till then understood. He says, we are a chosen people. Chosen meaning we have to be different from all that. We have to be different from the religious structure of Judaism, which is hierarchical and oppressive. The consequence is that the people are like sheep without a shepherd. And how can we do so? How can we abolish this hierarchical structure which necessarily works to the spiritual empowerment of the people, the laity? Each one of us has to assume responsibility for our own spiritual welfare. That's the meaning of becoming a royal priesthood. Royal in the sense of not dependent. Can you imagine a king who is dependent on somebody? Suppose you are the king of Kerala, suppose, or king of Tamil Nadu. You are not living in the age of monarchy, but for the sake of argument. When you are dependent on somebody in Karnataka or somebody in, even in Kerala itself, to govern the country, you always go to him and say, what should I do? Is this the way to govern Kerala? I'm the king of Kerala. Please tell me how to run the matters in Kerala. Is it possible? So, if you are a royal priesthood, the one thing that you cannot accept or practice is this dependence on somebody else, dependence on a different class of people, the religious elite called the priestly class. That's the one thing you cannot do if you are a royal priesthood. Now, if you are a member of the priesthood, then you have to at least take care of your own spiritual welfare. So, royal priesthood is a wonderful expression that combines two ideas. One, it excludes the idea of dependence on somebody else, a designated class of people called the priests. Secondly, it contains the idea of not depending or assuming the authority to take care of your own welfare rather than being led by the nose by somebody else. So you are a chosen people, you are a royal priesthood. Now with this, a tremendous revolution was introduced, unfortunately. The emergence of a priestly class within the Christian community has aborted that wonderful and liberating spiritual revolution. As a result, Christianity has become, over a period of time, a pale copy of Judaism. And what prevails in Christendom is, unfortunately, a mixture, an alloy of Judaism and Roman administrative structure, and the worst elements from both have been compacted together to create this very powerful, unfortunately very oppressive, people disempowering model of religious life in which the monopoly, the hegemony of the priestly class is supreme. A good example of which is the Pope, who is the exact replica of the emperor of the great Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Catholic Church is the religious counterpart of the Holy Roman Empire. And even today, the Pope has both spiritual and temporal authority. He is, in a world of democracy, he is a king. Though his kingdom is very small, de facto he is a king. Fortunately, we today have a Pope called Pope Francis, who realizes this and therefore tries to minimize the regal or imperial overtones of the papal office. He tries to conduct himself as much as possible like a commoner, like a man who has his feet on the ground, but the burden of office is too much on him, and therefore he cannot be entirely free to be fully human. But I salute him for the valiant and heroic effort he makes to look nearly human. And that's why Pope Francis is universally loved, and I'm one among the many millions who love him and cherish him as a fellow believer. I don't love him and appreciate him as a religious emperor. If he is a religious emperor, I have nothing to do with him. But I love and cherish him as a fellow believer who wants to plant his feet firmly on the ground. May God bless him. Thank you for your attention.